What's up guys, so it's time for another tutorial, and this time we're going to take a look at Angular 2's HTTP returns observables. So we'll cover how to use HTTP to make requests and how to handle the response. And we'll also see how we can make some basic authentication for an Angular 2 application. And before we begin today, I would just like to take a minute to promote my first Blur site course. So if you guys have an account, make sure to check it out and give it good ratings and spread the word if you like what you see. So what will we do today? So we'll handle GET requests, we'll do a simple POST request to authenticate ourselves, and we're gonna also do a GET request with an authorization header after we've authenticated ourselves. And something that's a bit off topic is that we'll get Angular 2 using Node Package Manager now instead, and the team has actually discontinued supporting the definitely typed repo because the typings is packed along with the Angular 2 this in the npm package. All right, so let's get started. Alright, so today we're not gonna actually use my own ng2 play repo since I haven't had the time to keep it up to date. So instead we're gonna use this pretty popular ng2 play repo until I've taken the time to update my own. So we're gonna start off by cloning this repo. We're also gonna get the server side from an auth0 repo that can give us quotes from what was it again? Can give us Chuck Norris quotes, and we can also authenticate ourselves to get quotes from our protected API point, and we can get quotes to start with without authenticating ourselves. So we're gonna clone this repo as well. And let's just fire up the server, the first thing we do. We'll install all the dependencies and then just go ahead and serve the server. And let's also fire up our ng2 play repo. Install our dependencies. Alright, so we've gotten our dependencies here, and now we can just type gulp play. Hit our app, and we have an Angular 2 application running. So let's take a look at the code and get started with HTTP. So in this tutorial, I'm gonna go back to using Visual Studio Code because it's just simpler to get started with that using this Pavel guy's ng2 repo. And we're actually watching the files. So when I do some changes to the TypeScript files, it's gonna refresh the browser as well. Or I don't know if it's gonna refresh the browser, but it will transpile to new JavaScript files. And as you can see here, the first thing we run into is that we are actually compiling using gulp, and the Visual Studio Code editor actually wants a tsconfig file. So we're gonna just give it a tsconfig file to get rid of the errors that we can see here. A tsconfig JSON file. And hopefully we don't need to restart the editor here. We just got rid of the errors, so we're good to go. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna come to the index.html page, and we're gonna include the HTTP module. So we take a look under Node modules, Angular 2, and we can actually see that we have gotten Angular 2 from Node by also looking at the packages JSON file. we have a dependency to Angular 2. So we're running the at the moment of this recording, at least the latest alpha. And with alpha 45, we can take a look in bundles and get HTTP dev. So let's switch back to index.html. Just copy paste this line and make sure to include the HTTP module. By doing so, we can switch back to hello.ts and include a couple of new imports from the HTTP module, which is HTTP and the headers. Alright, so switch back to hello.ts. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is to get the quotes from Chuck Norris without actually authenticating ourselves. So we're going to start easy. So let's create a constructor here in our Hello app. And we're going to resolve the HTTP service. I'm going to make it public so we can use it in methods down here. And we're also going to need to do one more thing. We're going to actually need to go ahead and get something called HTTP bindings and pass it into our bootstrap method. And we're actually going to need to import HTTP bindings. And hopefully now, if we switch back to our browser and refresh, everything will work as expected and we don't have any problems with resolving our dependencies. Let's see the development tools side by side, refresh, and everything still works, and we can see that we've gotten that we get HTTP as well. And if we take a look at the source, we are resolving HTTP and we are also resolving it into our constructor, and everything seems to work. And let's just make sure that it isn't null or undefined. So it looks like we are good to go. Right, cool. So far so good. Now let's throw in a button here, and when we press the button, we want to go ahead and get a quote. So instead of a name here, we're gonna have quote of the day. Let's have it empty to begin with, and we're gonna simply output the quote, and then we're not gonna care about styling or something. We're just gonna put in a button here that we're gonna hook up the click event. Whoops. And we're gonna call something called get quote. Get new quote. Gonna get rid of this line here. And let's create this get quote method. And take a look at the documentation for our server here. We can see that if we call a point called API random quote, it's going to return a string with a random quote from Chuck Norris, which is pretty cool. So in here we can use HTTP to make a GET request. So far it's pretty similar to using promises. Let's also add a base address there. Take a look at our server. It's running on port 3001. But the difference is that we're now actually getting an observable back. And what can we do with the observables? So first of all, we're going to need to map the result to what we're actually getting back here. And what we're getting back here is just a simple text field. If we were to get back a JSON structure, we could just type JSON here. But for now, it's a text. And then we want to subscribe for the results. And the first Lambda expression here is the next method, as we call it. And if you're familiar with reactive extensions from before, this won't be any news for you, but if you haven't, so this is the method that gets called when everything goes correctly, right? So then we just want to set the quote of the day to the data. And the data is just a simple text field. And the second Lambda expression is the error function. And we're just gonna log the error to the console. Let's do that, separate that into a separate function, just in case we're gonna use it more than once. So we don't want to repeat ourselves. We're gonna log the error. Whoops, something went wrong. And then just append error. And then we just also want to log when we're completed. So console log random quote complete. You need to spell console right. So if we switch back to browser now, we'll hopefully have a button that we can press to get a random quote from our server. Come back here, F5, get new quote. And we actually get a new quote every time we press the button. So what else can we do with reactive extensions? There actually is a whole bunch of operators to pull from and to customize the stream. So if you haven't worked with observables before, you can get an idea of how they work by just Googling it. But it should be noted that the Angular team is still deciding on the best way of implementing reactive extension JS operators with HTTP. Which means that many of the operators aren't available for use just yet. But a couple of operators that are available for use are, for instance, the filter operator. We can filter for quotes that are longer than 10 characters long, which basically should be all of them. But if we refresh here, we can press get new quote. And we're actually filtering the quotes now. So we can do a couple of more things just to try it out. We can, for instance, it's not actually making any sense to do this, but so we can delay our subscription for 2 seconds like this. We switch back, refresh, press get new quote. It won't, we won't get it until it's past 2 seconds. But something that might be a bit more useful is the retry operator. So if we're expecting network connectivity issues, we could define a number of times to retry the request before giving up. And we actually want to do that before the map. So we're gonna do retry. We want to retry 3 times before giving up. Let's get rid of this delay and switch back. So because we're running locally here, it won't actually make a difference, but we can at least see that it's working. All right, so let's try to get a request from an authenticated, from a secure endpoint. So we're going to try to call the protected API endpoint instead. And if we just try to call this now, we're going to see that we're going to get an error. Protected random quote. So what happens now? Refresh. And we see that we got an 401 unauthorized response. So we need to authenticate ourselves. And let's add another button in here. Listen for a click event. And then want to call something called auth, which we'll implement in a second. And here we want to do a post. So we're gonna pass it as URL encoded form in the body. So the credentials would be username equals Gonto and password equals Gonto. And if we take a look at the source code, if you wonder like how did I find out what the password is, you can take a look at the server.js file, and let's search for, so it wasn't in there, my bad. I think it could be perhaps in the config.json. No, that's the secret that we signed the JVT with. So here we are in the user roots file. It says that we should actually be using a database for users here instead, but we're gonna go with the default one, that's Gonto, which is enough for this demo. Right, so that's our username and password. Then we're gonna create a header and append content type and set it to be application x form URL encoded. And then we're gonna do a post to which endpoint. Let's take a look at the documentation. Session create. Session create, and then let's just take the copy paste the localhost address. I'm gonna pass the credentials, the body, and what else? So we're gonna need to pass the headers, of course. So this is how you do it in Angular 2. It's pretty similar to you working with promises, except for how we subscribe for responses, right? So in this case, I mentioned before, if we want to map JSON, we just type .json instead of .text there, and then we want to subscribe. So this is an observable, and for the success method, we just want to call a method called saveJVT, which we'll implement in a second, and response will contain a field called ID token. The error function, so this is good that we did the refactoring. We're gonna call the log error and log it, and then we're just gonna log to the console that authentication is completed. Auth is complete. So let's just create a saveJVT method really quick down here. And we're not gonna use any library for this. I'm just gonna be real optimistic here. Hope that you're running a browser that is somewhat modern, and use local storage to set an item ID token and save the JVT there. So we come back to our browser now and do a refresh. Let's put a breakpoint down here to make sure that we actually store a JVT. I'm just going to press the off button. We got our success method routed us here, and we can see that we actually have a JVT that we'll hopefully be able to use to get data from the protected API. And if you press get new quote now, we are still not posting the barrier token along with the request, so we still get the authorization header was not found. So let's do that next. So we switch back to the code here, and in the get quote, before we actually do a request, let's get the JVT from the local storage. And hopefully you guys, if you implement this, you're gonna do it a bit safer. But now I'm just gonna assume that you pressed the authenticate button before you press the get new quote button. And let's create our auth header. Let's just do a check that we actually have a JVT, and then append an authorization header. Authorization, and tell it that it's a barrier token, and then just append the JVT. And now, as we could see in the previous request, we can pass along the headers like this, and then just set headers to the auth header. And hopefully now, if we come back to our browser, refresh, press the auth button, make sure that the request finishes, and now press get new quote, and we're actually getting this from a secure endpoint. So that's pretty cool. Alright, so that's about everything I'd like to show for now. I hope you guys learned something. So we saw how we can do a get request and a post request to retrieve our barrier token, and then we use this with the authorization header to retrieve data from a secure endpoint. And we saw that Anglet 2 is now packed with a node package manager, and we get the typings from there. So for this demo also, I didn't use my own repo because I've been pretty busy with the Pluralsight course, finishing it and promoting it. So I'm gonna try to get my ng2 play repo up to date. So we use this other guy's repo that's using the latest alpha for the moment. And just to wrap up, we've seen that RxJS returns observables, which is great. And we have a lot of good operators that we can use on the stream. And since it's still an alpha, we can't use all the operators that are available, but they will be as soon as the Angler team decides how to implement them best. So we saw how we could use operators like retry to automatically start a request again if there are network issues, and we can do filter and stuff like that. So until next time, have a good one, guys. Bye.